Right, we are here today, me and Josh Denny, and we're going to be discussing, well, I'm going to start with a quote from Gurdjieff's book, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. Blessed is he that hath a soul, blessed also is he that hath none. But grief and sorrow are to him that hath in himself its conception. So I thought today we could talk about the soul in Gurdjieff's writings. So after that quote, where would we start, Josh?
Right, yeah, I think it's a good quote to start on, because I guess like in a lot of the, a lot of the different traditions, or at least people's interpretations of them, there does seem to be the idea that the soul is something that's kind of automatically given to man, or like an automatic possession of man, like just by virtue of being alive and being a human. There's the idea that every human is in possession of a soul, so there's that idea that seems to be present in most of the mainstream kind of religions, and that might appear to put it at those teachings at variance with Gurdjieff's teaching, or at least some of his expressions on the soul, because in a lot of his expressions he kind of says that man isn't really born with a soul. He's only born with the potential for a soul. And so that kind of requires in life some form of work in order to develop the soul, develop that potential, and that there's no kind of guarantee, whether that will happen in the course of someone's life, as in whether that kind of if you imagine that he'd say that the soul is like a seed, then it's like saying, well, yeah, everyone's got this seed, but there's no guarantee that during the course of life it will develop. So, although on the surface that might seem, to put his teaching at variance to to general religious traditions, you can see through some of the quotes, like in Christianity, that there is some similarities there, like the parable of the mustard seeds, like Christ talks about. So the different seeds can be land in different conditions, and some of them might land in conditions that don't allow for growth and development, and some of the other seeds might land in conditions that do. So that's one. If you equate the seed there with the seed of the soul, then again, even in the Bible, there's ideas that there's different. There's no guarantee on the development of that seed, and Christ also doesn't. He has that quote, attributed to him, like what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? So, if one way you look at that quote, you could say, well, therein it's saying that there is the possibility to lose and thereby also gain a soul. So if it's something that can be gained and lost, then it's not something that we can kind of just take as an automatic given possession of man, and something that's doesn't really change in its nature or the course of someone's life, or isn't something that's subject to or requires development and growth. So in that quote that you started with, the idea then being there that obviously if someone kind of has no notion of a soul, or no interest in anything of that nature, just like a purely kind of what we'd say nowadays as like a materialistic outlook, then they're not going to really be bothered by any of those questions. So they're not going to have maybe experience any significant kind of internal suffering from that. And again, the idea then being that the person who has the soul, well, then they've achieved kind of what is at least kind of purported to be the aim of human existence or purpose of it, and in that achievement being some kind of completion or like sense of fulfillment and contentment. So those two poles, the people being not in suffering, whether you don't give a shit about the soul or whether you've got one, but if you've been in the process of in between, in like the process of transformation, not only have you got you can have the suffering from the desire to have the soul, then the search for the soul and feeling the lack of it, but you can also be involved through that desire in this kind of the suffering then, or even just the efforts and the work that might be needed or involved in the development of that soul. So, you know, you could be experiencing suffering from the longing of the soul, and the kind of suffering that's connected to the work involved in its development.
So with our souls, we're kind of it's that's what needs developing, because that's what's going to take us on to the next stage. So is it some
Yeah.
kind of divine connection to Gurdjieff calls it the his endlessness? So is it our connection to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's that idea that, yeah, the soul is kind of, if not sort of the same as, very close to whatever we would call as, yeah, man's like essence, you know, his pure essence, his nature, what he is, and by virtue of that what he is in his pure nature, his essence, that's what connects him to kind of God or the divine. So again, the idea being that the soul could be the very like seed of divinity, of God, that's present then in man. So yeah, the development of the soul then, or the seed being expressed as the development of man's connection to his endlessness or God, both like, you know, here in life, and also that having an influence on his, you know, his afterlife, you know, because obviously the soul is, in most all of the traditions, it's portrayed as, you know, it's immortal, but that can be in different ways, you know, different ideas of what immortality is. And in Gurdjieff's teaching, he talks about kind of different levels of immortality, or different degrees of it, depending on like the different bodies, you know, the different higher bodies or levels of man that you're talking about. Like you could say the different, like he mentions two higher bodies, like the Kesdran body, and like the highest being body, which you could relate with the soul. And so he calls them like Beelzebub's tales, but they go by other names in like his earlier teachings in Search of the Miraculous. But there's the idea that, yeah, that each of those kind of higher bodies or levels has its own, you could say, its own kind of immortality. But again, in what he says, he only kind of attributes real immortality to what, you know, would be the highest body or the soul.
Because I was recently discussing Blavatsky's idea of the soul, and the reason that came up was because there's a quote of her saying that she was walking or being taken along a street in London, and she was seeing lots of soulless people everywhere.
Yeah.
So I was asking the Theosophist, is that because she says not everyone's born with a soul? And no one could really answer me, and it made me start thinking about, well, what was Gurdjieff? Does he say that we have to develop it from ourselves? Do we have to find it? Are we not all born with one? Do we have to make it?
Yeah. Well, like again, in some of his explicit things that Gurdjieff is recorded of saying, he kind of suggests that he kind of says that no, we're not. You know, man isn't born with a soul, but he's born with a potential soul. So then you could theoretically think, well, okay, then is every man born with this potential for a soul? And he kind of seems to suggest that pretty much everybody is born with this potential. But even in that potential that man's given from birth, there are variations in its kind of very nature. So, you know, again, you could think of seeds from a tree, and though though the collection of seeds that are viable, that are not duds, you know, there might be a major proportion of them might be viable. There could still be differences in terms of like the vitality of individual seeds, so that if you put the two seeds into, you know, the same conditions, one might grow better than another just because it was quote unquote a healthier seed. So if you think the seed with the soul or its possibility, different people might be born with kind of different degrees of potential in terms of the development of the soul. Like if you kind of imagine the soul as a material, literally like as some kind of substance that's present kind of in the body, even though it might be not like limited to the body, then you could just imagine literal kind of different potencies, you know, in the nature of that substance between people. It could be distributed in different qualities. And again, in like the earlier teachings of the work, like in Search of the Miraculous, that kind of material then, or that difference in potential is expressed in terms of the magnetic center, you know, which is this part of man that again can maybe be present in everyone, but present to different degrees. and that being what can kind of lead him towards ideas or teachings or people that are food for his soul, that would help it in its growth. So it's kind of not in one sense strictly overtly answered in terms of whether everyone has the potential for a soul or not, but he seems to err on that side, but he does still express variations in the
because I always thought his book seems to be, I know everyone takes different interpretations for Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, which I have a copy of here, everything, all and everything. For me, I've always thought it as a guide book to develop the soul.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just kind of like almost, people might see it as just a quibbling in terminology, as like, some teachings say, oh well, every man is born with a soul, and then like some of the teachings seem to say, oh well, he's not born with a soul, but everyone's born with a potential. So it's just whether it could be just a toss up of terms between whether you're talking about the soul as a potential or as something that's actually kind of already developed. But obviously, if we're talking about development of the soul, then that entails that the soul can be developed, and so that means that it could, at least theoretically, then it can, whatever you're starting, the state of the soul that you're starting from can be different. So I mean, there's already the ideas of like previous lives, coming into it, that people could say, well, this, whatever my potentials are in this life may be determined by previous lives, or the idea of like astrology and things, that my potential is determined by the influences that were present in my birth. So in a lot of these teachings, they are saying that the soul is, or whatever its potential is, subject to hazard and variation, differences, but also on another level, it is by its nature what makes us all the same. It's about, if it's that the pure essence of man, it's something that's beyond the differentiations, that we normally think separate us from other people, our identity.
I've seen in some religions, though, and faiths, they talk about the soul and spirit, and I sometimes find they get them a bit mixed up, whereas in Gurdjieff's writings, the soul and spirit are two quite distinct things. I've always read it that the soul is the essence and the spirit is the personality. Can you comment on that?
Well, again, like you're saying, it's a kind of a tricky one, because those two terms, like, they've been around for quite a long time, and different traditions, like you say, see them in different ways. So, like, obviously, I tried to look at it in the way of not so much trying to define either term, but just, as in putting this particular label on this thing and the other label on the other, but trying to realize that obviously the two terms exist because they refer to two different things. But yeah, so I would say then that the soul refers to, like, if you look at some of the old traditions, there's that kind of duality or dyad between like spirit and matter.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, then soul then would be kind of the meeting ground of spirit and matter. So in man, every man then, every human has obviously both a material nature, so like, a body made of the physical elements, but every man also has a spiritual nature, something given to him of the spirit then, or like, the God, the divine nature. But and these two kind of come together in what would be termed soul. So in that way of looking at it, the soul's kind of the middleman between, you could say, the spirit and matter, or the spirit and the body, and is what is kind of the more individuated expression. It's, like you could, if every man has a material nature or body, and every man has a spiritual nature and body, then you could see that there's less variations in those, less individuality in those two elements. They're both like elements that exist outside of man and are not that particularized, but they come together in a unique way in the soul. Like the soul has this ability to unite the material and the spiritual natures in a kind of individual expression. So that's one take on those the two terms. Like spirit is more like a universal principle, the same as matter, part of that like essential dyad, whereas the soul is a product of the creation the action of the spirit and matter, you know, in a certain formation. Like, you know, you could speak of the soul of a tree, or the, you know, the soul of man, or the soul of a different animal. So it's like an individual.
The earth soul.
Yeah, yeah. But and each of those souls would have a material and a spiritual nature or expression. But having said that, in Gurdjieff's terms, right, like we said, there's the physical body, but there's also these other higher bodies. The kind of the step up from the physical body, in his terms, is like called this Kesdjan body, and there's also kind of connections there to the astral body and the mental body, you know, of other traditions. And in the term Kesdjan, you know, it comes from the Middle East, like probably like Iran, Iraq, that sort of area. In our kind of translation of it, it would be something like vessel of the spirit, or spirit vessel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be like a name for the second body, and then Gurdjieff refers to it as the next body above that as the soul, you know. So in that term, in that way of looking at it, it's kind of flipping around the two terms, because it's putting the spirit sort of term as the middleman between the highest body, the soul, and the physical body.
Okay,
But
I did not
again,
know that about the spirit wrestling, that was the name or meaning for Kesdjan.
yeah, well, it has a connotation of spirit body or spirit vessel, vessel of the spirit, and also, again, not from my researchers, but from other linguistical, you know, people who are interested in the study of, you know, language. There is kind of a connotation there of also half body or dual body, and so what I would take that as what it's kind of trying to express is that first highest body, the Kesdjan body, what Gurdjieff sometimes calls the second, you know, the second body, it has this kind of dual nature, that it's on the one hand partially of a kind of material nature that resembles the physical body, or like, you know, physical matter, but it's also got something that's of more of like, say, than the spiritual nature, or, you know, or the soul. It's of a different kind of you could say a different kind of materiality, but a different kind of nature that's not, you know, not the physical. And so that the Kesdjan body then is as a middleman between, yeah, the physical body and the soul. And so it kind of has that connotation of being a vessel, you know, to the soul, like Gurdjieff, doesn't he? He kind of talks about it, that second body, as playing a part in what happens at the moment of death or after death. You know, he kind of almost describes it as like a temporary vehicle that the soul, let's say, if it is developed, uses to ascend to its appropriate realm. So the vessel side of it being, yeah, that it serves that purpose to for the soul to use, rather than being the soul itself.
I was reading a bit of Beelzebub's Tales before we started this, and it's one of the chapters is when Beelzebub first goes to Tibet, and he talks about how there's these people who are trying to clean their souls, because they believe that was the way to make it better. So they go on all these different exercises. I'm just trying to find it, and I've lost it now. I had it here. Oh, right, that's it. They were called the self-tamers.
Oh, yeah.
The self-tamers' special form of existence to purify their soul of all the alien growths due to Kundabuffer.
Oh, yeah.
Kundabuffer's polluting the soul in some kind of way by leading us astray, isn't it? With all our, with giving us the fake idea of life. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, he talks about Kundabuffer as kind of, you know, one of the main sources of our problems. And obviously in the term, you know, Kundabuffer, there's, you know, some people make connections to the word Kundalini. And he writes about that in Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff, kind of saying that the term Kundalini is a sort of, you know, distorted linguistical expression of the original idea of Kundabuffer. You know, that idea of Kundabuffer has come distorted down the years, and this other term for it has been made, but it doesn't kind of really refer to what it meant originally anymore, but refers to something else. So yeah, he talks of the Kundabuffer as like an organ that's implanted into man back in his, you know, back in ancient history, And why is it's implanted into him is because he's kind of like almost like developing too quickly, you know, in such a way that's out of balance with, you know, his environment, or, you know, the solar system, or, you know, whatever level you want to take it to. So some measures are needed to, you know, to counteract that imbalance. And it's also implied that they kind of the higher powers that be, that, you know, are doing the work of implanting this organ into man, don't really kind of want man to know, you know, about what they're doing, you know, why they're implanting this organ into man, and so on, because I think that there's the kind of fear there that that if man kind of found out the proposed purpose of his creation, that he might you know, get upset or have a revolt about it, because it could seem to him that he was just, you know, created as a kind of like, you know, almost slave to, you know, to the creation or the purposes of God or higher beings that were, you know, the purposes that might be foreign to him, or were that were there regardless of his choice about things. You know, he had no say in what he was created to do or what he could do. So the idea being that they have to kind of, you know, do their work in a bit of, you know, bit of secrecy from man.
Yeah, in denial.
Because they don't want him to possibly, yeah, realize that purpose and not be able to handle it. You know, because so there's almost the idea then already that man might not be able to handle, say, then finding out his purpose then, or even a higher purpose, because he already has this like tendency in him. You could again link to egoism, that, you know, that he finds it hard to kind of, you know, commit to some purpose or you know, some action that's not like, you know, arising from himself, that's not his own choice. Do you know what I mean? He likes to feel that he's in control of his own destiny.
We're free.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so there's the idea then already that it looks like there's trouble as to man being able to commit to some higher purpose and to serve, you know. But yeah, so the organ's implanted in man to kind of slow down his development, and, you know, it's implanted in connection with this catastrophe, you know, this like comet that collides with the Earth kind of unexpectedly. You know, the higher powers seemingly had, you know, no knowledge about it, came out of nowhere and smashes into the Earth, and yeah, some of the fragments of the Earth become the moon, and so there's like the need to, you know, feed or tend to or account for this new fragment, the moon. So they have to make some adjustments, and that involves, yeah, kind of like the creation of man, or the making use of man in a particular way, in order to serve the, you could say, the moon then, or the general harmony. So it's implanted into man for that purpose. Then it's kind of they take it out because they think, you know, it served its purpose, and man's development is, you know, more in harmony with the cosmos around him. So they take it out. But again, they put it in and you know, without realizing that it was going to have some kind of after effects.
It's addictive.
Well, yeah, they put it in and thought that they could put it in and take it out without this having any lasting consequences, because I guess like they assumed that the effects would be localized kind of to the organ, and so if the effects are localized or just caused by the organ, when you take it out, they should stop. But the idea is that those effects, and what effects were they? That they were supposed to interfere with man's perception of reality, of himself and the world, and kind of like almost do a complete 180, turn it on its head. So they take it out, but again, unfortunately, the kind of the properties that it produced in man are still present, and so there's the question as to, well, how and why are they still present? And I think it kind of seems to suggest, on the one hand, some property of man's biology. So we could look at like DNA and inheritance and things like that. So there's maybe some element there that wasn't, let's say, then foreseen by the higher powers. But I think another side of it also applies to like culture itself. Like you know, man by his nature is able to create and fashion different kinds of objects, and also through his powers of language, he's able to not just like fashion objects, and you could say fashion ideas, you know.
And develop.
So those objects that he fashions can, by their material nature, can outlive himself, and by also like the ideas that he fashions, by their nature, they can pass to other people and outlive himself. So his capabilities in like being able to create what we could call as like society, like, you know, to fashion objects and art, and to be able to have, you know, to talk and have ideas about things, his ability to do all that creates an environment around him. And the effects of that environment are, like you could say, much more stronger and potent than the individual man, you know. So, and hence, like the ideas of conditioning, that when a man is born, you know, into the world, they're born into that atmosphere that the humans have surrounding themselves with, or the atmosphere that's a natural product of their kind of creativity. And it's a, you know, the potent influences, he can't stand up to that influence, and he has to go with whatever the, you know, the cultural conditions around him. So when the Kundabuffer is like implanted into man, again, there are some kind of connections made with it being as what produced culture, you know, like produced the creativity that happened in man, that, you know, that seems to have came from nowhere, kind of, you know, like around the end of the Ice Age and things, you know. There seems to be periods of relative stagnation in man's development, and then big spikes in development at other points in time. So yeah, there are ideas there that the Kundabuffer, what its result was when it was implanted, was like kind of the creation of culture, and the purpose of that being to kind of slow down man's development, and it being a product of his altered perception, you know, the result of the Kundabuffer. But that culture, by its very nature, consists of like this kind of environment that outlives the individual man. So even when then they took the organ out of man, he was still subject to all the creations and artifacts and culture that had been created through the presence of Kundabuffer. So being present in the effects of the Kundabuffer still being present, then you could say, in his environment, still managed to exert an influence on him, you know.
Because the Kundabuffer was an actual outside organ, wasn't it? If I remember rightly, wasn't it a towel, like a towel? We'd been given a towel.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, as far as I remember, yeah, it could be a tail, but it's only specifically mentioned as an organ, kind of just at the end of the lower end of the spine. I don't know, yeah, if it's specifically a tail, but
yes, you're right. It is. I think that's where I've put it in my own head, turned it into a towel.
You might be right. I
Yeah,
mean, because
it
there are the couple of different variations out there in the manuscripts, but so maybe in one he does refer to it as like an appendage, like a tail. But again, so with him locating it in the lower, you know, the lower part of the body,
it's fine.
People have made connect on the interpretation of that it kind of it means something to do with man's creative nature. Like, you know, people have looked at it in terms of a blockage. Like some people think of Kundalini in his chakras and in his energetic system. So they think of the organ as something that was implanted, like, you know, down in the root sort of chakras, which are, you know, some of like the generative side of him, like the physical power source, the physical energy. So then some implantation in him that caused, interfered with his, like, you know, chakras or energetic flow, and caused a distorted experience of the world.
Because I suppose that's one of the big questions has always been, where is the soul, and, you know, where is it in the body? I think the ancient Egyptians thought it was in the head, or do they think it was in the heart? But some people think it's in the solar plexus. You know, there's all these different ideas. Gurdjieff never quite specifies, does he?
Yeah, well, like he had that. He talks about that kind of like exercise in his book. I think maybe it's in Search for the Miraculous, actually, where, you know, he gets them to say "I am," in either aloud or inside, and try to see where it kind of, you know, resonates.
Isn't it?
Again, some people say the head, or, you know, the chest, or different places.
Or the solar plexus area.
Yeah, and I think some studies have been done with different cultures, you know, like asking them the same sort of question, and there does seem to be like averages that differentiate different cultures. Like, you know, some of the more like Chinese cultures tend to associate it with the gut and the stomach, Whereas like when you get to more of the European, it kind of starts to shift more towards the head. So again, that question is like, is that something to do with our different, genetics and biology in the races, or is that something cultural, where we experientially feel ourselves more to be? And obviously in the work, there's the idea that there are different types of people, and like, human beings who are more centered in the head or in the feelings or in the body. So that would make sense in terms of their experiences, where people might kind of feel themselves more centered to be. But like in terms of like where is the soul, or what's its relation to the body? Gurdjieff kind of talks about like, or at least the second body then, as being a very kind of physical process, like a quite literal somatic process of transformation in the body, using the body's kind of energies and involving the energies of particularly like sensation and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But so saying that it involves sensation and feeling, he also kind of seems to imply that it involves like what we call the mind, or some mental aspect as well, because he kind of talks about the mind as almost like he describes it like, using a kind of a metaphor, as almost like a cloud that permeates the body, and it can move around the body, but it can also expand or contract to different sizes, So he sort of says like, say if I'm eating something really nice, then it's like this material of the mind it becomes really localized in my mouth then, in the experience of the eating of the food. Or if I'm doing something else, some other physical action, it becomes localized to that part of the body. And he also goes as far as to say that not only is it moved around in accordance with our physical actions then, but also it's moved around with our mental movements, our thoughts. So like if I think of someone, like say my mother, then it will kind of automatically move in her actual direction, like spatially wherever she is to me. And that's where he kind of talks about people being able to pick up on that, you could say, the movement of that substance in other people, or the results of that movement in the muscles and the movement of the body. And he uses it as an example of being able to like read people. Like he gives the idea of setting up I think he does it, I can't remember which book it's in now, but I think he talks about it as doing it with one of his mates in order to make food. It takes money to make food. So they set out a little board with all the letters of the alphabet on it. And I think they maybe, get the person, then they put their finger, over the letters of the board with the letters on. And they kind of, get people to come up. And by their watching the people's reactions to their movement over the letters, they could learn such things as the person's name. Like if he asked me he says he's going to read my name, and moves his fingers over the letters and sees like I have a little almost very subtle reaction when he gets towards the J, then he maybe knows that my name begins with J, and he can work out the other letters that are involved and then tell me my name, and I might think that he's actually, read my mind, so to speak, whereas he's only sort of read the, the signals, the tells from the movement of the mind in the body. But yeah, so he talks about the mind as almost like, you can imagine this substance that, or this cloud that moves around, the body in relation to our experience, our sensory experience, and our thoughts and feelings. And he kind of says that yes, this mental cloud then doesn't really have any coherence. It's always kind of subject to the whim of shocks that are going on around it, like in the external environment, or just my haphazard thoughts. It's always been stimulated and stirred up, by that. And it's rare that we ever have it has any stability, any periods of being kind of like not agitated, not moved around. And it also is rare to have any periods of time where it's directed intentionally by ourselves. So a lot of like the practices then, like the movements and some of the the kind of meditative practices like the sitting, some of the other exercises that Gurdjieff has, you can see some of them in the light of what he says, that they can be aimed at trying to develop the coherence of this mental substance then, or develop its relation to the body, and that process being very close to what he calls the coating of the higher bodies. Like he talks about the development of the higher bodies in that sort of, in that language of coating. And it's a kind of can seem like a strange term, for development, but I mean, I suppose you could look at it in terms of like almost like painting something or spray painting something, or I kind of like the idea of what would be implied in the kind of same motion as like kneading dough.
Oh yeah.
Like you're pushing the same substance kind of through itself, aren't you? If you like, and that being like the alchemical thing of separating the fine from the coarse. So yeah, a lot of those exercises seem to be trying to develop some coherence to the mental substance, then the mind, and its relation to the body, like trying to inhabit, trying to make the mind inhabit the body, you could say. So, and Bennett, John G. Bennett, another a pupil of Gurdjieff, talks quite a bit about some of his own, his take on Gurdjieff's ideas, and also like some of his personal, experiences from years of practicing the ideas. And he kind of sees the soul then as like a literal sort of transformation or kind of cohering of that, what you could say the stuff of the mind, the mental substance. And that if that sort of mental substance achieves like a degree of coherence or order or stability, that it no longer kind of becomes dependent upon the body in the same way or related to the body in the same way. Like what we're saying about that if that mental cloud, is doesn't have much kind of solidity and can't really hold itself together when it's just being, moved around by all the influences, then it's kind of stuck, you could say in the body, or it's stuck being influenced by the actions of the bodily influences, and doesn't really have any independence of the body. Whereas we're saying that it can kind of develop some coherence and establish a degree of ability to, you could say, then become independent of the body or separate from the body. And he talks about that, and other people do in some ways, like as what can be going on in outer body experiences. Like if you talk about some out of body experiences that don't come through necessarily like physical injury, but some that maybe just come about out of the blue, or through people practicing certain spiritual practices, there's the idea that mental substance then can achieve a kind of a degree of coherence that is what we're aiming for, but it's only like achieved for a small amount of time or temporarily before so like I can experience these out of body, these different out of body states, but they might not last. And what I'm experiencing maybe in those experiences or states is a moment of the the mental stuff, then, or what we might call the stuff of the soul, or the stuff of the higher bodies, achieving a temporary degree, and like thereby being able to exist separate from the body. So if the soul is at least partially made from that kind of mental substance, then it's like it's like what we're saying. Everybody has that substance, but there's no guarantee that in the course of their life it's going to achieve a kind of degree of coherence that it can become independent of the body. So the idea being that it needs to achieve a sort of degree of independence of the body in life that's going to be able to serve it, kind of after death. Because the idea being there that the death is obviously a major shock to the system, literally, and that if something hasn't been developed in life, the soul's kind of not able to handle that shock.
Well, part of Gurdjieff's teaching is to make us aware that we are all going to die at some point. It's what's it they say? There's only two things that happen in life: taxes and death. So you never know. Maybe we will be able to extend our lives in some way. But you're talking about the coating of our bodies, and the way we do that in the Gurdjieff work is by doing the work, isn't it? Working on ourselves, how we are in the world, how we deal with things. Well, it goes on for a long list of ways of working on yourself, but that's how we develop these bodies, isn't it?
Yeah. The idea being that all the different aspects that the work teaches being aimed at then, let's say, then the development of the soul, and that the work then not just involving like, you know, meditative practices, but also like obviously just things in life, you know, like the general things of trying to work with our negative emotions, and you know, just all the general things, you know,
working with other people.
yeah, so like, you know, trying to see it as a holistic you know, something that's achieved through a holistic kind of practice, rather than just, you know, just some form of intense meditation, or you know, because in his book, like Beelzebub's Tales, he does kind of seem to suggest that, doesn't he? Like he has the example of like people in Tibet, some of the monks kind of shutting themselves off in these like little chambers, and like spending their whole life in isolation, you know, only getting the food served in and out, not seeing anybody, in this attempt to, you know, achieve develop the soul or achieve enlightenment. And obviously, you know, he's kind of says that it's, you know, that's a distorted way of looking at it, and that this that not only can the development not be achieved by that kind of way or that action, but that it needs to be achieved via what we would try to see as a normal human life, you know, as in one where a person was engaging with all the sides and requirements of life, you know, like all the different sides of life being necessary for man as food for his soul, you know. So obviously, if I lock myself away and just engage in one kind of form of practice, I'm not going to get the necessary, you know, food for the development of the soul. But yeah, like I say, the work, trying to be something that acted upon all man's different sides, but obviously mainly then, you know, his mind, his emotions, and his body.
So I'm going to bring this to a close now. Really, what we want to do, we want to develop our souls so that it can develop our bodies, our other bodies, our higher being bodies, so that we can, once we do die, hopefully not get caught up in the cycle of feeding the moon, and that instead we would move on. Well, it's not go to the sun, is it? But if you become solar powered, you go onto the next stage of whatever our journey is supposed to be. I said that really poorly, but maybe you can
I get
say it a bit better.
But no, yeah, obviously the idea being that it's not just you know, not just some personal pursuit of trying to develop this thing just purely to save yourself, you know, from dying. You know, obviously it's tried to be expressed as something bigger than that, and you know, and serving some larger purpose, and that, you know, you could say that the nature of the soul then on the higher bodies are of a different nature to our kind of personal identity, so that it's not, you know, so what our ideas about immortality in the soul might be, you know, radically at odds to the reality, because we take things in a very, you know, in a very personal way, and think it's that immortality is still going to involve our kind of normal form of consciousness, our normal sense of self. We think it's going to be me who's going to achieve this immortality, you know, and carry on living in some kind of form of experience that's similar to what I know. So I would try to say that it's great to ponder like these things about the soul and you know, higher matters, but like it's really important to try to see, you know, the kind of thinking that we're using to look at the soul, because, you know, you can ask people, you know, what comes to mind when I say the word soul, and someone might literally have an image in their head of some kind of you know, ball of energy or something that's in the body, and then when we talk about the idea of the soul leaving the body, they might imagine literally this ball of energy leaving the body. So I mean, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that as a picture of the soul. I'm not saying that that's wrong or right, but we can see that picture of the soul, when, you know, our imagining of it is it's based on our physical experience. You know, we're still imagining the soul as some physical substance, you know, with like three-dimensionality, whereas the very nature of these higher bodies and the soul, they're expressed to be of like a higher nature that's not, you know, it's very, very different to our common sort of sensory and three-dimensional experience, and our ideas of like, of objects and ourself as, you know, as an object. So in one sense, when, you know, it's advised when we're thinking about higher bodies not to picture them as literal, like, you know, bodies, just like some shining gold version of yourself, trying to think of them as some, as in some of the way, but also at the same time when we're trying to think about them in their other side, not put them too, too far away. I mean, there is the idea that these worlds then, or these dimensions that these higher bodies correspond to, or that enable you to participate in, are right here in our current experience. They're not separate to us. Obviously the other dimensions and stuff, they're not elsewhere in physical space, because there are other dimensions, they're right here, but just not in our normal understanding in a spatial way. So yeah, I'd say try, if we're thinking about it, which is a good exercise to try to ponder, what is the soul, trying to imagine what is the kind of materiality of the soul. Imagine yourself then experience yourself, you die and you enter your higher body. What does that experience look like? I mean, are you still looking at a physical body with a sense of being in it and being in relation to other objects? Is that the kind of experience and world we're imagining is present after life, or is it something even radically more different than that, that we can't kind of
that we can't quite figure out?
Well, that we can't picture with our with our normal mind. It's like, say, if I don't have some experiences of something of that nature, I don't have any material really, or I'm limited in the material I have to kind of to think about it and ponder it. Like, I think Bennett gives the idea of thinking of, well, imagine what it would be like to try and tie a knot in 4 dimensions. Again, just question what is the nature of the the kind of materiality of a higher dimension then, as compared to this physical one.
Beyond our minds.
Yeah. I mean, again, Bennett, I think in one of his, it might be in his like autobiography, he talks about another one of his experiences of like, leaving the body, an outer body experience, and it happened apparently when he was in Gurdjieff's flat, so I guess it was the later days of his Gurdjieff's life. And, I think they were just in one small room, and Gurdjieff was sitting in one chair, and there's the other students sitting around, and I think Bennett was standing up doing a reading, probably from Beelzebub. And he just said that, again, like a flash, in the middle of when he was reading, he suddenly found himself outside of his body, maybe, so to speak, hovering a few feet above and to the side of himself, and was kind of like, obviously not just shocked to find himself outside of his body, but he was shocked to kind of see himself carry on reading. Like, he was looking back at his own body and being amazed that, wow, it's, I'm, or he is still reading, and he's doing even, he's still doing a great job, better than me. And then he kind of says that he sort of, looked towards Gurdjieff and kind of saw sort of Gurdjieff almost like looking at him. So this implying as if Gurdjieff kind of
Gurdjieff saw the body that was out of the body, of the
So he kind of looks at Gurdjieff from outside of himself and sees Gurdjieff like looking in that direction, then looking up to the corner of the room as if he sees him, and kind of makes a gesture as if, says Gurdjieff makes a gesture as if sort of like, shrugging his shoulders. So what? Now what?
What are you going to do with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a great experience, and but in one sense he was still in the same position as when he was in his body, and that he didn't have any better understanding of what was going on, or he didn't have any better knowledge, or he was just outside of his body. But again, that for him confirmed the idea that there is something, there is a part of man's nature that is not at least completely tied to the body, and can leave and enter the body to various degrees. So again, we might consider whatever it is, that side of man's nature that can do that, is kind of what the maybe the soul can kind of be made of. And but again, there's the idea of trying not to so much to look at the soul again as something that we can possess, because again, we're talking about something that's the essence of kind of what we are, or even maybe our purpose, our divinity. So I think that's why there's ideas and traditions come about the soul as they look at the soul as not so much like, yeah, a thing or a body, then as a contribution, that man can make in the course of his life, like maybe the soul being like something that can be built from, the actions that man engages, maybe the good works, that a man does in the course of his life can literally achieve some kind of, have some the actual actions that he does have some independent being of their own, the actions that he does are not just the result of him as a body interacting with other bodies, but these actions, the good things then have have this kind of like being of their own, and that being then closer to the meaning or nature of the soul, rather than it being something that he can personally necessarily possess.
Well, I'm going to bring it to a close, and I just want to apologise to any listeners that wonder what all the deep breathing is, but my dog decided halfway through to come and lie next to me. And he's snoring away and breathing very deeply. So it's not me, and it's not Joshua, it's the dog. But
Yes.
thank you very much, Joshua Denny, for doing this, and we should do another one again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Doing our breakdown of Gurdjieff's work, if that's the right word.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, good to see you again. Take care.